Section 8.7, this is a really important section because palm cooling is not well understood, and there's a lot of different theories and misconceptions and challenges out there, and it's important to just get ahead of them and understand exactly what the science and the literature says. So the first misconception is that a small surface, and this being the palms of your hands relatively to the rest of the body, would be a small effect. The reason that's not true, or at least that's strongly misleading, is that the amount of heat transfer possible through the hands, through the small surface, is disproportionately high. It is really, really anatomically optimized for rapid heat transfer. And this is an evolutionary, brilliant design of the human body. So yes, it's a small area, but it's targeted, designed specifically for heat transfer. And with the proper interface, with the proper engineering of, let's say, palm cooling, you can really generate a lot of heat transfer, and it can have sizable gains. And this is well shown in the literature. A limitation is the ease of use, portability, and accessibility. Any technology, modality, protocol, idea, thought, the best things in the world, if they are not usable, if they are not accessible, if they are not adopted, they really count for zero. So the challenge is finding a system or a device that integrates with your flow, your environment, your athletes, your situation, and is used and adopted. Building in that user design and making sure the user experience is optimal, accessible, portable, easy, fast, simple. Those are significantly going to increase adoption and therefore enable the opportunity to receive the benefits that palm cooling can offer. So here's a quick rundown of what an optimal implementation should be. So something that is self-contained, free of ice or water. Ice, water, they melt, they lose their temperature fast, small heat sinks, and requires a lot of extra work going back and forth, not always accessible. Something designed for those short duration uses, 60 to 90 seconds in between sets, on the break, during a water break, practice, games, something quick, easy, small, portable, compact, easy to use. Takeaway being that the cooling interface, not the biology, is often the bottleneck. So we know that palm cooling works. The limitation is often the interface, the technology, the application. That's really where we want to optimize. A challenge that comes up is how to integrate it into session flow. So will this interfere with pacing or intensity? Is it a distraction? Would you compare this to a massage gun or other, sports recovery tools or technologies? Whereas in reality, if you can communicate that and you can build that into rest intervals and you can program that and you can educate and coach the athletes and get data and collect it and see, it really can be integrated seamlessly. Now, there has to be deliberate design and intent, but great opportunity for palm cooling to be used. Misapplication here. So this is the preconception that cold is effective cooling or that colder is better. And largely speaking, there's just an intuitive human belief that something that is cold or any cold object, so an ice pack or a chilled bottle, would therefore be optimal for dump heat transfer. However, this is a really, really important point, especially for palm cooling, is that excessive cold will inhibit heat dissipation. It'll have the opposite effect. It'll actually result in heat retention. And the reason being this great study by Wallow in 2015. The body will vasoconstrict. Remember, it's extremely thermal sensitive. There's a high rate of thermal sensitivity in the glabre skin. So this study by Wallow, he had participants put hand in control water, which was fairly warm, I believe. So it was warm water, and then their other hand into water of varying temperatures, the cooled hand. So what we see is as water temperature on the very top left in A slowly drops down to about 21.5 degrees Celsius, you will see in section C, the cooled hand, the velocity of blood flow falls off a cliff. So blood flow through the hand, or in this case, I believe it was through the finger, at 21.5 degrees Celsius water temperature, that's over 70 degrees Fahrenheit, is essentially eliminated, essentially constricted. That is not cold at all. So there's this belief that if you put ice packs, or you need to get as cold as possible, but you will have almost no blood flow. And that is at a significantly warm temperature. Now on the right, we see this pattern where the control hand are the black dots, the open dots, and I know they're small, are the cooled hand. At 35 degrees Celsius water, you see pretty high. 27, they still seem fairly close. You start getting to 22 Celsius, and now all of a sudden, there's a drop off in the velocity through the cooled hand, and cooled being 22 Celsius. Once you get to 19 Celsius, I believe, if my math is correct, this is putting us in the high 60s Fahrenheit. There's almost no blood flow, almost no velocity through the cooled hand. So temperature sensitivity is really, really important to consider. So colder is not always better. Feeling cold is not always good. In fact, that can actually be contrary to the intent. The objective is not temperature. The objective is heat transfer. So this flips around to the other side and a misconception that you could have a palm cooling interface and say it doesn't feel cold enough. Now, perception matters, placebo matters, adoption matters. So you need to make sure that you are connecting and there is a strong understanding with the athletes and the users. However, the most effective cooling may not feel cold, so to speak. And that's especially if surface temperature is high. So we were looking at that last chart and saying 20 degrees Celsius seems high. But if skin temperature is 35 Celsius, you still have a very large temperature gradient. And if you have conductive heat transfer, it is very large. So an example for this is when I first came across palm cooling, I needed a very low cost way to validate it. And I bought these copper pipe fittings from a hardware store and I held them in my hand. They were large, they had really high surface area, but they were room temperature metal devices. And I held them in my hand during sets of successive push-ups till failure. And I had a performance benefit. I increased my volume just with these room temperature metal devices, purely on the principles of thermodynamics. Now, they weren't optimal, but they worked. It did not need to be cold. It did not even need to feel cold. It just had to get heat out of my body fast. So heat transfer matters, not temperature. To educate and to counter those concerns, a few things to say or to mention or to communicate is that feeling cold is not the goal, but removing heat is. And tools designed to feel colder, for example, freezing packs or ice packs or frozen bags, may induce vasoconstriction. So they may actually hurt you. They may actually hurt your performance. The takeaway being the most effective tools are designed for heat transfer, not temperature. That's the take-home message. Now, as far as adoption, perceived novelty, skepticism, it is still a relatively new concept, certainly as far as implementation goes. And so completely understandable to see some skepticism and resistance to adding new things or things that may be perceived as gimmicks. So low initial trust without social proof. The solutions to that would be to pair evidence and testimonials. The other thing would be to implement, to try to create and observe your own data, objective and subjective, and evaluate based on that. So adoption follows evidence and experience. The best way to overcome the skepticism is to give users the opportunities to feel and measure the difference firsthand. And that also goes for coaches and practitioners. A very short abbreviated list for what would constitute effective palm cooling. You want to have a target temperature with a delta T, ideally of pushing 15 degrees Celsius. So 10 to 15 degrees Celsius for the interface could be good. However, 10, even 15 might be too cold. It really, really depends on what that material is and what the context is. I would be willing and almost recommend in some cases to even go as high as 20 degrees Celsius for your target temperature where you can still maintain a high gradient. This is going to be highly nuanced based on exactly what that interface is, but you want to have a target temperature that's not too cold. As far as conductivity is concerned, maximum thermal conductivity, especially for conduction. So metals are your obvious choices, and aluminum being the most common and probably the most accessible, but not foam. You don't want to have cloth, none of those plastics or woods or anything like that. Anatomical fit, you want to have it ergonomic. You want to have it fit. You want to be able to maximize contact area with the thenar and hyperthenar eminences, fingers, the palm. And then for duration, 60 to 180 seconds. That's going to be your sweet spot for efficacy as well as practicality and integration into whatever work you are doing.